Well, hello everybody in YouTube land. Welcome to Kevin's video today. And Kevin's video today is going to talk about life in the universe. Not how good it is or how bad it sucks, but where it's at and how much of it is there. And to be honest with you, right up front, while you're watching this video, I don't know how much it is, where it's at, or how many languages they speak, Klingon and all that. But I did take the research available, and I don't know, didn't really see it out there as far as anybody else putting it together like this. Kind of put it together and came up with my estimate of things, and I'm not actually going to even give a number to it. And, quite frankly, you can look at it and say, well, I think I might agree with that. Or you can say, that don't look right to me, or I don't agree with that. And if you don't agree with it, then kind of think, well, why don't I agree with it? What part don't I agree with? And put your own numbers to it. And either way, you're going to be surprised. Because I don't think anybody really realizes what these numbers are. And when we go through them, I think it doesn't matter if you're I believe in aliens or not, you're going to be surprised. And it's going to make you think. So let's go start out. We're going to start out with the idea of how we figure that out. And of course, somebody figured that out a long time ago, a lot smarter than me. His name was Drake. I don't even remember his first name. His last name was Drake, and they call it the Drake equation. And pretty much most people have heard of it. There it is, which means absolutely nothing to me. Probably means absolutely nothing to you. Express out a little bit with the actual, all that. If you're willing to do it, you can find this on the internet in many, many places. Let's put it in an easier format. Okay. Here is a picture reference of the Drake equation. Lots of planets, few of them with life because of all the factors that we have of how many of those planets are around suns that can support, stable orbits, and how many are in habitable zones, how many have atmospheres, and other ones have atmospheres or stable atmospheres, and the products for life: oxygen, water, and amino acids, and it comes down to that. When you get into this equation, the very interesting thing will be covered here in a little while, is how do you figure out, when you have all those things, at what point do you get to life? And that one's, I think, a little bit, I won't say faith-based, because if you understand what I'm going to go over here in a little bit, and if you're a person of science, you'll say, yeah, I kind of think that's right. And that's where it's going to get interesting. So, in starting out, I had to let's figure out about how many stars are out there. It takes a star to provide warmth and a stable orbit for planets because, gravity and planets and moving and all that kind of good stuff. And nobody really knows. There's some estimates. Let's figure it out. And then I've seen a couple estimates. And basically when I figured it out, I had to look at, say, how many galaxies are out there. How many Milky Ways. Not solar systems, like our 9 planets here. How many galaxies? 2 trillion estimated. That's a bunch. And then out of that, how many stars are in that? And the answer I got from looking around is an estimate, about 10 sextillion stars in the universe. 21 zeros. If you had showed me a sextillion, I would have never been able to identify it. That's a lot. Once again. So then we got to figure out, well, if there's that many stars, how many planets do we have? Planets, we think about, in scientific terms, exoplanets, which are large enough to be called a planet. There's 9 of them in our universe, and we don't count the moons, and we don't count the little floaty things out there. We call them things, asteroids, and there's different terms for different sizes and stuff like that. But planets, exoplanets, are big enough to be a planet. And if you want to figure out how to judge that, we have 9 of them, and, well, we all know which ones those are. So now I have to estimate, though, how many planets are out there. So how did I do that? Well, we don't really know. There's not really any estimate on that in total. So I had to extrapolate a little bit, and this is what I came up with. They estimate, and this is the only real estimation I could find, that there are 400 billion planets in our galaxy, the Milky Way. Well, there's 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. That seems simple math if we're just going to try and estimate how many are out there. This one I learned is a sextillion. I have no idea. Call it what you will. It's a bunch. That's a lot. So that's about how many planets are out there. Estimated by the number in our galaxy and the number of galaxies that are out there. Next question is, out of those planets, how many would be in the habitable zone? Well, there's a lot of talk going around about that. And scientists seem to think it's a big deal when they find one, but that's because finding planets is hard. They ain't really looking in other galaxies, I don't think. I could be wrong. They're trying to look in our own galaxy and find them. So I started doing a research. Well, how can we figure that out? And you think about, in our solar system, not that they're habitable, but there's 3 within that Goldilocks zone. They call it Goldilocks area, Goldilocks zone. And a matter of fact, temperature-wise, even to say Mars, if it had a little different atmosphere than what it has, would be a habitable planet. In fact, there are some scientists who say at one time it did have evolution. Planets come and go. It's a fact. And at one point, it may have had a different atmosphere than it does now, and liquid water may have existed. And when they look for signs of life, and that could have been billions of years ago, because our planet came up 4.5 billion years ago, didn't mean that Mars didn't form 2 or 3 billion before that, or that our planet went through a collision with something and really had to reform or whatever. We don't know. So at this point, let's just say potentially Mars at one point was in the Goldilocks zone, had habitable, and scientists are looking with the rover on Mars and believe they may have even found some signs that there was life there at one point. Bacterial, whatever. Life is kind of life. As long as the planet sticks around long enough, that life can evolve. So, extrapolating from what other research says, not just to think that out of our 9 planets, 3 of them are kind of in that habitable zone, I looked up and said, how many does scientists that do this for a living think there are out there? And in the Milky Way galaxy, it's estimated by actual scientists. I just play one on YouTube. I don't really actually play a scientist. I am today. 500 million planets in habitable zones in the Milky Way galaxy. 500 million in the habitable zone just in this galaxy. How many is that then in the universe? Because, well, we just take this galaxy times the number of galaxies. Well, that's that bottom number. Guess what number we're back to? I know this one. That one's 10 sextrillion. So, in the grand scheme of the universe, 10 sextrillion in the habitable zone. So next we've got to figure out how many have atmospheres that are potentially usable. Now, I can't really say for certain that every planet out there has an atmosphere, because I'm sure there are some that don't, and what that number is, don't really know. This is a list from NASA. I wrote down here somewhere, source, NASA, of the atmospheres of the 9 planets in our solar system. And it even has the moon. You may not have known this. The moon actually has an atmosphere. 70% argon, 29% helium. But it's there. So, how many have atmospheres that may support life? Now let's think about that for a minute. May support life doesn't necessarily mean human life. And at the same time, life that evolves and may eventually evolve to the point of intelligent life, the ability to reason and think. And I kind of want to separate that from animals that might think and act out instinct, but still, it's those reasoning skills that separate us, use of tools and such like that. But it doesn't necessarily have to exactly match our atmosphere or what we could breathe in. Because let's say, and we have 21% of oxygen, and the rest is nitrogen minus 1% something and 1% something. But let's say there's a planet out there with 11% oxygen. Could life forms evolve to survive on that? Yes. Could it evolve to being more intelligent? Well, let's think of how much oxygen is contained in water that is filtered out by sea life. It's less than 21%. So there are ways that life can evolve in a lot less oxygen. In fact, there are some bacteria live on this planet in oxygen-free, and there's a name for it. Even playing a scientist on YouTube, I don't know what that name is, but anaerobic. Wow. There is anaerobic bacteria out there. Actually, used to work in a hospital laboratory, so that came to me like, duh, I know what that is. I actually even know what anaerobic bacteria is. Boy, I lose my mind sometimes. So anyway, there is anaerobic bacteria, and maybe not totally anaerobic life forms in this earth, that fish and such, jellyfish, but it doesn't need the same thing we do. So let's say I'm thinking about how many planets has a percentage, or if I'm going to knock that number down, how many have atmospheres that can support life? And there's no real good answer for that. So I had to try and, as much as I can, scientifically come up with an answer for that. So I started thinking, well, how many? What we do know. Well, 1 out of 9 in our particular solar system. And if it is true that Mars did at one time have a manageable life-supporting atmosphere, 2 out of 9. Well, I thought, well, that's kind of gilding the lily a little bit. So let's knock that number down just for argument's sake to say, I'm going to say 1 in a million in the habitable zone might have an atmosphere, because all planets have atmospheres in our solar system and other solar systems that we've been able to take a look at. And what they do is they measure the light spectrum, and light spectrums change with different gases, which is how they know, on that chart with NASA that I showed you, how they know what the makeup of the atmosphere is of Uranus, or I think they changed that name to Eurectum, so you can't say that anymore. They know that because they measure light, and they shine a light through the atmosphere, or they look at light coming from the atmosphere, and the color changes in that kind of dictate what chemicals are in it. And that's actually a commonly used practice. I'm just saying, out of all those, let's say I'm way underestimating that maybe it is actually like 1 in 9, or maybe it's 1 in 900. Let's say we're 10 times above the average, or 2 if you count Mars, and we don't really know, so I'm not even going to do that. I'm saying, let's just think about for a minute, 1 in a million. That number is still pretty large. That's still a lot. That's a trillion planets in the universe that could potentially support life. Remember, I told you, you might be surprised by these numbers. Now, let's say I'm even back to, whole 1 and 2 and 9, or even just say 1 and 9. You're still in those quadrillions. I'm just saying, there's a trillion, even if you just say it's 1 in a million, which doesn't even bode well in our own atmosphere or in our own solar system. So, now we have what I've come down to as kind of a number. How many planets out there, round stars, in the habitable zone, potentially with an atmosphere to support life in the universe? 1 trillion. And I think that's very conservative, which I'm trying to be. Divided by 100,000, 10,000. Again, we're possibly 2 and 9. Divided by 1,000, and it's still way over cautious, I think. 1 in a million leaves us 1 trillion potential life-supporting planets in the universe. When I started this, I didn't think that was going to be it. I was thinking maybe if it hit 1 million, that would be, wow, there's got to be life in the universe. 1 trillion. Okay, so, to my next reference sheet. Let's think a little bit more about things. The building blocks of life for supporting life. Let's say there's oxygen, and let's say there's water. And we don't know that life needs oxygen. It might be nitrogen-breathing animals, quote-unquote, out there, or beings. Plants don't need oxygen. They produce oxygen. They take in CO2. That would be... if there's CO2, there's oxygen. That's just a breakdown of the oxygen, or a breakdown of the CO2 will be oxygen. There's a smart guy out there, scientist, a lot smarter than me. I'll admit that readily. His name was Michael Crichton, 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 who came up with a theory. Life will find a way. Let's think about that. Life will find a way. If there are the potential for life, basically what he's saying, there will be life. And if you wipe life out in areas, eventually some sort of life will form back there, period. Life will find a way. And like I say, there are anaerobic, and there's bacteria that live on this planet in acidic conditions that would kill humans or any animal life that's so acidic bacteria live in it. Life will find a way. And so what's that mean? There's life. Okay, there's amoebas, there's single-celled organisms. And we crawled out of the ooze, per se. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. When was the first life that we can kind of, scientists, not me, I say we as I looked at it, I came up with this, but we're scientists, we as human beings, can kind of say that there was life. And the first life is estimated to be at 3.77 billion years ago, and the planet's 4.5 billion years old. That's not really long after the formation of this planet when there's life. Think about this. What was the planet like 4.5 billion years ago, or even 3.77 billion years ago? I don't think it was that hospitable of a place, and yet life formed. And life went from that to single-celled, to multi-celled, to plants, to animals, to crawling out onto the land, and then evolving to walk on the land, and then all through that. First known hominid, I did look that up. Hominid mean walking on two legs, bipedal. 22.5 and 3.9 million years ago, which is out of the 3.77 billion that we know, good estimate that life has been on this planet, any life. That's kind of a short history for us, being us and our ancestors, genetic ancestors. So we did a lot of evolution in that small amount of time. Think about that. And that's going to come into an important part here in a minute. So evolution is the next step in this theory and this thinking process. If there will be life, if there is life, there will be life. What is that life to become? What is it? Is that life, that single-celled organism, going to stay a single-celled organism forever? The answer to that is no. If you study Darwinism, if you study the teachings of Darwin, if you study anybody who goes into and teaches and theorizes about evolution, life will always evolve and adapt. Pardon me. Sorry. I mean, we used to have tails. That's why we have a coccyx. Our diets used to, our bodies have adapted. Our appendix was because we used to eat raw meat. And if you look over the history of just man, our size has changed as in reference to our diets and our needs. External forces will force evolution. Life will always adapt. Now I'm going to say, and I'm not going to call this controversial, this is just my thought process for putting all this together. At some point, whether it takes this 3.7 billion years, at which point we know there's little life on this planet, I say we, again, scientists have speculated, through, and that's actually a pretty wide held belief in the scientific community. That's not just, well, we think. They found through fossilized records and all that kind of stuff, 3.77 billion years. Whether it took 3.77 billion years or 9 billion years, or up to 3 times that, for single-celled organisms to turn into animals, at some point, if you have a single-cell organism, it's going to evolve. Eventually, it's going to get to the point of thinking. Life will always evolve. Now, what the external forces force and cause, and whether or not the environment stays stable long enough, another planet come by and crash into you, or all that kind of stuff. But if you have a planet that was formed and had the atmosphere and all the components for life, and life formed, and the planet and that atmosphere and that stable situation was around long enough, that life is going to evolve. Life always evolves. And that's what they're talking about. I mean, they didn't come out and say, well, that single cell is always going to come to a thinking being, reasoning being, able to reason. But the natural history is we've been around here for maximum 4 million years, and look where we've come from ape to we're building spaceships going to the moon, at least, or out to the International Space Station. We've been to the moon. We might be in Mars in another 100 years. That brings me to my next point, because this is a progression. Let's think about what humans have done in our history. And let's kind of compare that in a minute to the history of everything else that we're talking about. Steel, we needed that. First signs of steel, 1400 BC. 2020 years plus 1400 years, roughly about 3,500 years ago, man began to be able to process steel from iron ore. The first machine, 300 BC. Don't know what it was. About the earliest through the internet that I could find anything that said it was a machine. First things that really helped out, let's think of this. First bicycle, 1817. Not that long ago. Think about that. 1817. First engine, steam engine, 1698, almost 1700. It's only 300 years ago. Our history, we only had our first steam engine 300 years ago. Think about the evolution of man, going from 4 million years ago, first hominid, to now, only 300 years of that, if we had a steam engine. And we really didn't have modern science then. We're going to go over that in a second too. First gas engine, 1791, internal combustion engine. 1791. Right at 1800, 200 years ago, 229. That's amazing, really, that's that short of time in our history. Now let's think about the real progress. Albert Einstein, the father of modern physics. Sure, you got Isaac Newton and all these guys. I mean, Einstein really put the theory of relativity, the theory of spooky action and distance. He proved his idea about light bending around a planet while he was alive, obviously. He died in 1955. Subtract some of his life, let's say 1930. So really, modern understanding of the universe and physics is less than 100 years old. About 80 years we've had that good of an understanding. Think about medicine, Madame Curie and all that, 1700s. We're infants. We've been technologically advanced for less than 80 years. Imagine, we're flying in airplanes, we're building drones that are soon going to be carrying people. Especially when they get like solid state batteries that'll be able to charge faster and have more energy density and all that kind of good stuff. Imagine where we're going to be in 80 more years when we double. I mean, we didn't have computers back then. We didn't have any of the modern conveniences that we kind of look at today as necessities. I didn't look it up. When did Alexander Graham Bell invent the telephone? It wasn't too much before that. All the wires that had to be run and all that. 80 years of modern science. Sure, gravity was important and Sir Isaac Newton was quite a while ago. But really, modern science, 80 years. Now let's put that in perspective of the universe. There were some planets, and ours is 4.5 billion years old. There were some planets that formed, I'm sure, 15 or 20 billion years ago. If those planets are stable and maintain a stable atmosphere, and let's say that life didn't evolve approximately, was it 8/10 of a billion years, 800 million years after the planet formed. Let's say it even took a while. Took another 3 billion years for life to really start forming. How advanced is that civilization nowadays? And even if you take off the fact that we went from the first steel at 1400 BC, 3,500 years ago approximately, to our modern science being only 80 years. What if at some point in, let's just say there's another planet out there somewhere in the universe that is very similar to ours. Maybe not in size, maybe not in looks, but as far as developmental. When life began, when hominids began, when people started to learn how to process ore into steel or whatever they have on that planet, titanium or whatever. But they come up to the point of saying that, let's just say they were 300 or 400 years of that 3,500 years ahead of us. At some point, several hundred years before we did, they started discovering modern science. Think of where we went in that 300 years. I mean, in that 80 years, let's just say they're just 300 years ahead of us. let's say there's somebody who 8,000 years ago started learning how to work ore. They didn't go those dark ages like we did. How much more advanced are they going to be? You know where I'm going with this. Can they travel from planet to planet? Have they been able to traverse the vast reaches of space? Now, vast is a big number. I mean, vast is a big number, duh. Vast is a big concept because if you think about somebody within our own universe, I mean, our own soul. Now I've lost my mind. Somewhere in our own galaxy, being able to go from one solar system to another, be different and a lot less than from one galaxy to another, because that is a long, long way. But if you have the ability to transverse and whatever means you do, it's all relative. Going that far and going that far might not be a difference to them. Or going that far and this far, and you can't even see how far my arms are apart, for Christ's sakes, could be the same to them, because it's all relative. If the universe is from that wall to that wall, when it's all relative, traveling this far in that far that you can't even see, you'd have to be minute between the atoms in there, which would be like a trip around the world in that scheme of how big the universe is. Or traveling that far might take the same amount of time if you figured out the physics of that. Could I go from this galaxy to this galaxy? If I can go from within this galaxy to within this galaxy, and that's still a long way, that may be possible as well. So am I saying we've been visited by aliens? No, I'm just putting out the thought processes here, which, trying to bring this all together. And at that point, if there's an equation out there, and I didn't look this one up because this just kind of came to me, about how there's an equation of how, or a classification of how civilizations use energy, and it starts out with being able to harness power from burning fossil fuels, per se, to nuclear power, to harnessing the power of the sun. And I'm not talking about solar panel, I'm talking about the whole sun, which is way above us. And there's estimated, and in that, at least I have a category for people to harness the power of a galaxy. And let's say you're one of these civilizations, because people have thought about that, then they're obviously thinking that there are civilizations that can do that. One of these civilizations that